Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Southeast Radio.
Well, many people will ask, what exactly is needed to enable the decimated SME sector to have a fighting chance of survival after COVID-19? Well, Neil McDonnell, Chief Executive of ISME, the representative association for small and medium-sized businesses, has over 10,000 members nationwide, and he joins me now to explain what the association is calling for in this regard. Well, Neil, after what has been referred to as a modern-day war, how can the SME sector begin to get back on its feet?
Good morning to you, Karl. It's very tricky to answer that now in the middle of what is effectively the second stage of the reopening of the economy. We obviously, and we've publicly said, Karl, that we want that reopening to take place as quickly as it is safely and humanly possible to do so, because the SME sector is a totally unprotected sector. It relies entirely on its ability to trade. And when you shutter a pub or a restaurant or a hairdresser, there is no income. And while the government has been good at supplying income supports to employees, effectively there is nothing for a shuttered small enterprise other than the pandemic unemployment payment.
So how soon would you like the entire economy to be back up and running?
The first and the most important issue is we will have to see what the guidance on social distancing is, because that for anyone who does their business out of a premises, and that's going to very largely dictate how many people you can admit into your premises and what sort of precautions you have to take when they are on your premises. So it really does depend on what types of business we're talking about. Some businesses, of course, are essential services. They've traded all the way through. Others are non-essential but haven't necessarily been affected. You know, some businesses doing outdoor work or lone worker type work, but any of the sort of person-to-person services have been extremely badly affected, and they really do need to get back trading quite soon, or significant numbers of them will not return to trade at all.
And what are the prevailing concerns amongst ISME's membership base about reopening after the pandemic?
The first primary concern is going to be the health and safety of our staff and of our customers. A lot of businesses, especially in the professional services sector, are going to be able to return to some level of normality without necessarily returning to a business premises, and working at home has established itself as a reasonably reliable method of working for at least a good proportion of the workforce. But of course, those who are engaged in different types of services, I'm thinking in the health, beauty, hair and beauty, health, dentistry, medicine, chiropractic, all of those, physiotherapy, all of those are effectively person-to-person based activities. And the control measures that are going to be required to get those back to anything that looks like pre-COVID are going to be, in some cases, are probably going to be quite stringent.
And Neil, what is ISME's assessment of the adequacy of the supports which have been provided by the state to Indigenous SME businesses thus far?
Unfortunately, Karl, I mean, we have to observe that they're not remotely adequate. I mean, they've been very heavily debt-based, where the best exemplars around the world, especially Scandinavian countries and Germany, are providing direct grant assistance. Now, to some people that sounds like a handout, but don't forget, if a restaurant or hotel has shut the doors, you can't retrospectively sell those restaurant covers. You can't retrospectively sell those hotel nights. So those sales are gone forever. And the costs and losses incurred by those businesses while they were shuttered, if they don't discharge those costs, then someone is left carrying the can. So grant assistance to those businesses isn't actually going to do anything other than just keep them trading. As soon as that money goes into those businesses, it will be immediately shared out among the other businesses that trade with and credit those businesses. So, we expected a lot more grant aid. The grants that are available are extremely hard to access. They are strings attached grants. They tend to be grants for services rather than straight cash grants. And at the moment, businesses are so risk averse that they really do not want to take on debt. And it's quite evident in the figures produced by the Department of Business and Enterprise that businesses simply are not availing to any significant degree of the SBCI loans, or the most successful has been Microfinance Ireland, and I think it's a little over €10 million that has been loaned. Those kinds of levels are absolutely minuscule relative to the size of losses that the small enterprise sector has experienced. So they're grossly inadequate, and the government really needs to rethink its strategy.
OK, let's talk about grant aid. So for a second, what type of grant aid and how should it be administered by government as far as you're concerned?
Our own analysis shows us that the average small enterprise owes €78,000 to its creditors. Now, that money is owed, if you think of your local pub or your local restaurant, that sort of money is owed to the butcher, to the baker, to the local accountant. It's owed to the local cleaning service. It's owed to the local bookkeeper and accountant. So they are the sorts of people who are going to get burnt if we don't step in and provide those businesses with liquidity. Businesses like those need probably, depending on the type of business you're talking about, somewhere between €5,000 and €25,000 right now in cash, and that will immediately circulate among their creditors, and it will keep them from going insolvent. You may also, Karl, have seen that we've been very actively lobbying for an examinership light to protect businesses that we see as viable, and they are viable, but they've been forced to shut their doors, and they can't afford to access the existing protections under Irish law.
Examinership Light was introduced back in 2014 through the Circuit Court as a cheaper way for companies to access that. What are you calling for in terms of changing to that particular regime?
The changes that were brought in 2014 allowed those proceedings to take place in the Circuit Court, but in reality they didn't save small businesses a huge amount of money. So what we are suggesting is that the court aspect of examinership be stalled until the end of a process. In other words, that creditors would voluntarily sit down with an examiner and agree a scheme of arrangement. And if people were in agreement, then they wouldn't need to actually access the courts at all. And we think that providing a system like that would give far more companies access to the existing examinership provisions because they'd be able to afford it.
In relation to grant aid, the government introduced a restart grant in the last number of weeks whereby businesses can apply to have their rates rebated for the past 12 months, anything up to €10,000. What are your thoughts on that scheme, and is it something that goes far enough? And of course, we also have to bear in mind that there are many, many businesses across the county here in Wexford and indeed across the country that don't pay any rates because they're not operating out of a commercial property.
Yes, so there are two problems with this. You put your finger on one. If you're the type of business that runs out of a non-commercial premises, you don't pay rates in the first place. But secondly, and especially in rural areas, the sorts of businesses that pay, €5,000 to €10,000 in rates are relatively few and far between, and they're probably town centre. So actually the number of businesses that will be able to avail of that particular grant assistance are actually very small.
What are your thoughts on the Revenue's Temporary Wage Subsidy Scheme?
It's a good scheme. I think it was unnecessarily complex. I think there were elements of it, for instance, the fact that it didn't cover high earners early on. Now, they progressively relaxed that. But if you think about that, that is a really serious breach of the social contract. There were also businesses that did hire people legitimately hired people after the 29th of February and who don't qualify. You know, the easier we make schemes like this to administer, the fewer T's and C's there are in these schemes, then the greater likelihood people will be kept on payroll, and the greater the chance that we will not maintain the horrendous levels of unemployment that are actually existing at the moment.
So how long would ISME like to see the Temporary Wage Subsidy Scheme extended by, and how would you like to see it phased out?
Yeah, I mean, there are two important variables there, Karl. Excuse me. One of them is how quick the business restart phase is, right? So the faster that businesses can reopen, the less they will be reliant on the Temporary Wage Subsidy Scheme. Okay, that's number one. But secondly, there's an issue with domestic demand. So, and this is why another part of our SME recovery plan has been to talk about grant assistance and stimulating demand, because, you know, if hotels, bars, restaurants, hairdressers open and people aren't there going into them, then, you know, we're going to run into the same problem where there isn't custom. So we need these things to happen all of a time. We need businesses to be able to open their doors and have people confident to spend. So look, we would like the wage subsidy scheme to end as quickly as possible, but it has to go hand in glove with the reopening plan.
And if any SME owners are listening to this morning's programme, what advice have you got for them, Neil?
I would say, look, there are a lot of resources there. I mean, we have a coronavirus page which links to all the current government supports. The most important thing, though, I would say to them is, look, we've been here before 10 years ago. This will pass. You know, every day you continue trading, you continue looking after as many of your employees as you can, and you attempt to get back into some form of trade, whether it's online or remote trade. Every day you keep going is one day closer to a normal economy, so keep going.
What is your outlook for the economy here in Ireland over the next 12 to 18 months?
As bad as COVID is, the UK remains in the transition phase of its withdrawal from the EU. So to all intents and purposes, as we sit here in June, the UK is, although it's not technically a member, from an economic and a tax perspective, it is a member of the EU. But that changes on the 1st of January. And there has not been a sufficient level of movement between the parties in the last number of weeks. And unless there's a road to Damascus conversion in London in the next number of months, we could be looking at something that's quite difficult, especially for agri-food on the 1st of January.
Well, if you've just tuned in, that was Neil McDonnell, the Chief Executive of ISME, and I would echo Neil's sentiment that the critical contribution which the SME sector makes to the Irish economy every year now needs to be recognised by the incoming government by providing it with the vital supports that entrepreneurs so desperately need right now.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
South